All right, so in today's episode, we're going to be going over fixed versus variable rate movements. So basically, I was doing some work on figuring out how to go about programming certain movements, and there are these two distinct groups of movements. There's groups of movements where it's beneficial to build up set sizes, and there's groups of movements where it's beneficial to build up how fast you can do them. And when I was looking at this, I was trying to figure out why one would be the other. And it came down to whether or not an athlete is able to cycle the movement faster or whether or not the movement is fixed. So when we're looking at defining what a fixed rate movement and a variable rate movement are, the fixed rate movement is basically going to be any movement where when you are moving with what is pretty much commonly used as the most efficient movement pattern for that specific movement, it's really hard to speed it up or slow it down. The other type of movement that we have is a variable rate movement. A variable rate movement is going to be a movement where the athlete can speed it up and slow it down. So this is the easiest example for this is going to be machine work. So anything on an erg is variable rate, right? You can get calories faster or you can get calories slower. What I'm getting at here is that you can speed up and slow down. You have control over the speed at which you're doing the movement with variable rate movements. So again, here's a look a little bit more in depth on what a fixed rate movement is and what it looks like. So a fixed rate movement is a movement that doesn't have variable rep speed within the confines of the athlete. So depending on their anthropometrics, they will see slight changes in speed. So for example, Colton Mertens probably is going to be doing toes to bar faster than someone like James Sprague. But while there is that difference based on their anthropometrics, the speed at which Colton does toes to bar is pretty much going to be the same set over set, and his reps per minute that he's completing toes to bar at is going to be more or less fixed unless he has a significant deviation from his most efficient technique, right? Examples of movements that are fixed rate movements are going to be muscle ups. This is for the elite athletes only. I find for the less advanced athletes, they are usually a little bit slower on muscle ups. It takes them a little bit more time to come off of the top of the ring, and it sometimes will take them a little bit longer to dip out of the catch position on the turnover. So for the elites though, they're all pretty much doing muscle ups at the same speed. The speed at which they pull themselves up, turn over, and then press out is more or less going to be the same, with the exception of being maybe at the very end of a pretty dense set. Handstand walks are what I would categorize as fixed rate movements until you are elite. A lot of times folks will learn how to handstand walk, and then that's kind of the only speed they get. And the same thing is kind of true for double unders to a lesser extent though. This is like a high skill gymnastics movement that people don't have quite enough proficiency in to have control over their ability to speed up and slow down, and therefore the rate at which they are doing it is fixed. This is different for elites, and we'll get into this a little bit later, because elites are capable of speeding up and slowing down with a much greater variance because they have enough control and the circumstances require it. If they have to do obstacles or whatever it is, they are sometimes able to speed up, slow down, and change direction, that sort of thing. Kipping handstand push-ups, more or less going to be fixed rate. The rep speed of the contraction on the handstand push-up is a lot faster, and so there's a lot less variation rep to rep, and the eccentric loading of a handstand push-up is pretty negligent, considering you can just come down and bash your head into the ground. So they're pretty much a fixed rate movement. Some folks might be a little bit slower, but they're more or less taking about the same amount of time rep over rep for most individuals who can do them. Toes to bar, wall balls, and pull-ups are all fixed rate movements. It's hard to speed up a kipping pull-up, right? Especially a butterfly pull-up, is however fast you do them. If you're hitting the movement standard and moving efficiently on any of those three movements, you're not gonna have much room to speed up how fast you actually do the movement, right? And so that's why we're considering them fixed movements. So how do you get better at a fixed rate movement? You build up functional set size, right? And so if you can't actually speed up the rate at which you're doing the movements, then the only way for you to get a competitive advantage over the rest of the field is for you to be able to do denser sets of the movement, right? And so if you're all doing toes to bar at the same speed, more or less, right, then the best way for you to get a competitive advantage on toes to bar is to last longer on the pull-up bar than your competitor does. Therefore, you get more reps done and you can move on to the next thing before they can, right? And so for any of these movements, I did a video on how to build up to functional set size, but basically you're going to want to start with doing full rest. You want to be able to hit functional set size on these movements. Once you've got functional set size knocked down, then you want to start adding in a little bit of fatigue and then slowly building up the amount of fatigue and the intensity of that fatigue and the interference to the point where you are able to maintain really dense sets of the movements, at least whatever is required from the competition. And again, those numbers are outlined in a previous video that I did. Once you can do that, then that's when you're going to have a lot more of a competitive advantage, right? And so if you can only do 5 toes to bar at a time and you and the person next to you are more or less doing toes to bar at the same rate, but they can do 10, 15, or even 20 in a row, they're going to have a big advantage over you, even though you can both do them at the same speed, right? So moving forward, all right, so moving on, we're going to look at variable rate movements. So for the variable rate movements, they're going to be dependent on your strength, movement economy, and fitness, right? And so we can use the burpee, for example. Strength is going to be your ability to press yourself off the floor, your ability to flex the hip and the midline so that you can get your feet up close to your hands. And then movement economy is whether or not you have to basically think about how you're doing the next rep. If you have great movement economy, you're moving really efficiently, the reps don't take as much energy, and your strength and your fitness work more for you when you have great movement economy. And then finally, fitness, and fitness is just your ability to breathe heavy and tolerate the requisite amount of work. You can tolerate and endure longer and further than your competitors can. One thing to note here also is that for anything like moving external load, strength is important because it helps you implement faster on the concentric portion of the lift, but we'll get into that. So some examples of variable rate movements are going to be handstand walks once you are elite, because you can, talked about earlier, speed them up, slow them down, and have a little bit more control over the rate at which you are completing the movement. Strict handstand push-ups are a good example of a variable rate movement. That one's funky because it might not seem like it at first, but when you look at the fact that what's going to allow you to do faster handstand push-ups and also denser sets of handstand push-ups is your strength, right? And so that's something that as you increase your strength, you will be able to do the movement faster. You'll be able to cycle a strict handstand push-up faster. It's one that has a very glaring, it's a movement where it's very obvious that being weak slows the movement down. Right. And so if you've seen somebody before who's not very strong in their vertical pressing relative to their body weight, when they do strict handstand push-ups, a rep might take 1 to 2 seconds for them to complete. Whereas when you watch the video of Matt Frazier doing 50 unbroken at Wadapalooza with Craig Ritchie, he gets them done in 45 seconds, right? And it's because he can just get through them so fast, right? Anthropometrics, of course, his range of motion is shorter, but the speed at which he is able to contract and press himself up and off of his head is significantly faster, right? Rope climbs are a good example because they are something that depends heavily on your movement efficiency, right? And so the more efficient you are with your leg hook, your steps that you take to ascend the rope, the easier the movement becomes and the more that you can do and the quicker that you can do them. Same is true for wall walks. Having more strength in your overhead position and being really efficient with those is going to benefit you, and you'll be able to do them at a faster rate. Like a good example of the wall walk, the way this is different than a toes to bar is like a toes to bar, everyone at the affiliate who can do a toes to bar takes about the same amount of time to do one, right? For wall walks, that's not the case. So if we have everyone do 3 wall walks, 3, 2, 1, go, 3 wall walks, people who are really efficient and really strong are going to be able to bang those out really fast. If we have everyone jump up and do 3 toes to bar really fast, they're all going to pretty much jump up and land at the same amount in the same amount of time, right? Any external load is going to be a variable rate, right? So most barbell or dumbbell cycling. Folks who are stronger can move the weight faster and basically do bigger sets, right? And so we're looking at moving the implement faster here with variable rate movements, but you can imagine if you were going to have somebody do a 225 pound prescribed deadlift in an open workout and their max is 275 pounds, the speed at which they're going to be able to complete the reps, regardless if it's unbroken or not, is going to be slower than somebody who can deadlift 450 pounds for a 1 rep max. We already talked about burpees. Double unders are a little bit of a caveat. They kind of fit in there with the handstand walk. When you are newer to doing double unders, most people only have one speed and one gear. As your fitness improves and as you become more efficient in the movement, you can speed them up and slow them down. So that's why I have them here on the variable rate movements. V-ups are another good example. If you have really great core endurance and ability to compress your core, those are movements that you can get done quickly. We've all seen people get stuck on V-ups from not possessing the requisite amount of strength, and there's a lot of doing one and then laying on the floor in between reps, right? Running and shuttle runs and any sort of machine work should be pretty obvious why that's a variable rate movement. It's the most pure version of a variable rate movement where you can go extremely slow and you can also go extremely fast, and it depends almost entirely on your fitness, right? So to build up work rate, I've done content on this before as well, but basically what you need to do is determine what a competitive rep speed is. So burpee box jump overs, it's like 15 reps a minute, right? So you figure out what your competitive rep speed is, and it's different for all the different movements. So you need to be able to extrapolate and figure out what a good competitive pace is when you're developing your training. And then you want to work at that speed with appropriate rest, and then slowly work yourself from small bursts at the race pace into full duration workouts at race pace. And so what that looks like is maybe you do 30 seconds of burpee box jump overs and you try and get 7 to 8 reps. And then when you complete that, you're resting a minute or even 2 minutes to expose yourself to the pace and then allow yourself to recover so that you can do it again. Eventually you could work yourself up to doing 15 burpee box jump overs on the minute, rest the other minute, right? And then eventually it could be like, once you do 5 sets of 15 burpee box jump overs, rest 30 seconds between, right? And this is a slow progression. As you work your way through it, you're checking in that you are achieving the speed that is required of you to be competitive, right? And so I wouldn't have a client do 15 burpee box jump overs, rest a minute, and do that 3 times if they can only, I wouldn't have them do it if it's taking them 1.5 minutes to do the burpee box jump overs, because that pace isn't relevant anymore, right? We want to only be exposing ourselves to the pace that's relevant in the race pace. And so we use intervals and rest to achieve that, and then slowly develop longer duration stints, and then you can start adding in other things as you work through that. Right, so strength training with variable rate movements, it should be pretty clear with that strict handstand push-up example on why strength is really important for a variable rate movement. Basically, the stronger you are, the faster the contraction can be with relatively less effort, and the denser sets you'll be able to tolerate. So the lower percentage the contraction is of your 1RM, the easier it is for you to do the contractions quickly, and the easier it is for you to do bigger sets, right? And so when we're looking at doing these variable rate movements, if there's a strength limitation, it'll show itself by your inability to tear through the concentric portion of the movement really fast, right? And so the easiest way to get better strength is weakness is to get stronger, right? And I know that's easy to get stronger because it's a pretty straightforward path, but it's also a very long and arduous process to gain significant amounts of muscle mass. So it can be frustrating for some, but even a dumbbell snatch, you could imagine if your 1 rep max deadlift is 225 pounds and you've got to do a 70-pound dumbbell snatch, that's 70 pounds is a pretty significant amount of your 1RM relative to a games athlete who deadlifts 550 pounds. That 70-pound dumbbell feels a lot lighter for them, right? And that's why they're able to kick through some of those heavier weights. So the framework, you want to be able to do functional volume in a training session, regardless if it's fixed or variable in terms of its speed. For fixed rate movements, the goal is to build up to functional set size, right? If you're not capable of tolerating functional set size, then you need to get stronger and likely add a little bit of technique work to build some efficiency. And then that's going to allow you to be able to hit functional set size. Once you can do functional set size, just start to fold in intensity, slowly work it into things like interval training and metcons. And then finally, at the end, you can transition it into a full mixed setting, which would be online qualifiers. And if you're trying to be a hero in a class workout, that's another context. Right. For the variable rate movements, you have to be able to do functional volume first. So you need to be able to do 100 burpee box jump overs in a session and be able to tolerate that and get through that before it makes sense to really start to stress the movement, right? Depending on what your limitation is, you're either going to need to get stronger or increase your movement economy, right? So if you're feeling like burpee box jump over, for example, your arms are blowing up every time, you might need to add in some close grip bench press or some hip flexion strengthening exercises so that the movement itself gets a little bit easier. Or if you feel like you're really strong and you're not getting fatigued, but it feels like you're discombobulated and inefficient, then just work on your movement economy. That one's pretty easy to clean up and you can do that pretty quickly, right? Once you have good movement economy and the requisite strength to tolerate functional volume, then it's time to expose yourself to the race pace and then maintain race pace using intervals and different kind of work rest ratios to get yourself into a contextual setting so that you can then go on and do it in online qualifiers or class workouts or games or whatever the competition or workout is. Okay. So hopefully this is helpful for you. I thought that there was two distinct paths here in your approach for the most efficient way to build up these certain movements. So that's why I wanted to do a video on it. So if this helped, DM me, let me know. Happy to talk more about it if you guys have any questions about it.